The story begins in Istanbul, where M6 operative James Bond stumbles upon a grim scene. Fellow Agent Ronson is gravely injured, and a vital hard drive has been stolen from a nearby laptop. The stolen device contains highly classified information, and Bond wastes no time pursuing the thief, a skilled assassin named Petrus. Assisted by Field Agent Eve, Bond engages in a high-speed chase that tears through the crowded streets by car before shifting to motorcycles racing across the rooftops of the Grand Bazaar. The pursuit ultimately spills onto a moving train. As Bond attempts to reach Petrus's carriage, he's shot in the shoulder. The confrontation escalates into a brutal hand-to-hand fight atop the speeding train. From a distance, Eve takes aim with a sniper rifle, but Bond and Petrus's struggle makes a clean shot nearly impossible. Under pressure, M6 Chief M orders Eve to fire anyway. The bullet strikes Bond, sending him plunging into the river below. He is presumed dead. Months pass. M reluctantly begins drafting Bond's obituary. Soon after, she is summoned to a meeting with Gareth Mallory, chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee. He reveals the devastating truth. The stolen hard drive contains the identities of undercover NATO agents embedded within terrorist networks worldwide. Mallory suggests that Maya's leadership failures warrant her forced retirement. M refuses to step down and returns to headquarters determined to regain control. During her return, her chief of staff Bill Tanner discovers that M6's database is being hacked remotely, using M's own credentials. As they rush back to headquarters, police barricades halt them outside the building. Moments later, a massive explosion tears through M6's offices, killing multiple agents and sending shockwaves through the intelligence community. Meanwhile, Bond is very much alive. Having survived the fall, he has been living anonymously in a tropical hideaway, drowning himself in alcohol and fleeting distractions. However, when he sees a news report covering the M6 bombing, he abandons his self-imposed exile and returns to London. Bond confronts M at her residence, where she informs him he was officially declared deceased and all his possessions placed in storage. Though skeptical of his condition, she permits him to rejoin the service, provided he passes the required physical and psychological evaluations. At M6's new underground facility, Bond struggles through the tests. His aim is unsteady, his body weakened, and he is clearly not at peak form. Removing fragments of shrapnel still lodged in his shoulder, he sends them for forensic analysis. Bond later meets with M and crosses paths with Eve, who has been reassigned to administrative duty under Mallory. In Maya's office, Mallory bluntly warns Bond not to fail again. Analysis reveals the bullet fragments are composed of depleted uranium, rare ammunition used by only a handful of operatives. When shown potential suspects, Bond instantly identifies Petrus. Before heading into the field, M directs Bond to an art gallery where he meets the new quartermaster, Q, unexpectedly young and highly tech-savvy. Q equips Bond with a discreet radio transmitter and a new Walther PPK fitted with a biometric grip that only responds to Bond's handprint. Following Petrus's trail to Shanghai, Bond tracks him from the airport to a towering skyscraper. Inside, Petrus silently eliminates a security guard and assembles a sniper rifle in a high-rise server room. His target is an elderly Chinese businessman meeting with an enigmatic woman in a neighboring building. Just as Petrus fires, killing the businessman, Bond attacks. A fierce struggle ensues, culminating in Petrus falling to his death when Bond loses his grip. Among Petrus's belongings, Bond finds a casino chip linked to Macau. Across the skyline, he notices the mysterious woman watching him closely. Back in London, M receives a taunting message disguised as a promotional link. Upon clicking it, a video plays publicly exposing the identities of 5 undercover agents, with a promise to reveal more each week. The cyberattack has escalated into psychological warfare. In Shanghai, Bond returns to his hotel room only to find Eve waiting for him. She brings troubling news from London, confirming that the crisis is far from over. Back at his hotel, Bond and Eve share a moment of playful tension. Eve carefully shaves Bond's face and neck, their banter hinting at unfinished business between them. Soon after, Bond heads to the Macau casino and presents the chip he recovered. The cashier, assuming he is the hired assassin, hands him a briefcase containing €4 million payment for the recent killing. Inside the casino, Bond spots the mysterious woman from Shanghai. She introduces herself as Saverine and invites him to join her for a drink. As they talk at the bar, Bond senses her unease, particularly around the heavily armed guards shadowing her every move. He presses her about her employer, and her composure begins to crack. She warns him that he is walking into a trap and may not leave alive. Bond notices a tattoo on her wrist, and she quietly admits she was once trapped in Macau's criminal underworld. Before leaving, she instructs him to meet her aboard her yacht, and, if he survives, to kill her employer. As Bond exits the casino, Savarine's bodyguards attack. Using the metal briefcase as both shield and weapon, he knocks out 2 attackers before a third tackles him over a railing into a pit filled with Komodo dragons. Fighting his way back up, he is nearly shot by one of the recovering guards, until Eve intervenes and disarms the man. Bond casually hands her the briefcase and tells her to put it all on red. Later, Bond boards Savarine's yacht as it cuts across dark waters. She showers while the tension between them builds, both knowing danger lies ahead. Meanwhile in London, the cyber crisis worsens. The agents exposed in the online video begin turning up dead, their executions posted publicly. Gareth Mallory informs them that the Prime Minister has ordered her to testify before a parliamentary inquiry. Though reluctant, Mallory insists that MI6 must answer for its failures. The yacht arrives at a remote island dotted with abandoned structures. As Bond discreetly activates Q's tracking device, Savarine grows fearful, urging him to turn back. Armed men quickly surround them. Both are captured, bound, and separated. Bond is taken to a vast room humming with computer servers where he is tied to a chair. Moments later, an elevator descends from above, and Raul Silva steps out. Silva reveals himself as a former MI6 operative abandoned by M during a failed mission years ago. Captured and tortured by enemy forces, he claims M sacrificed him because she deemed him too reckless. He taunts Bond, exposing that M knowingly sent him back into the field despite failing his evaluations, planting seeds of doubt in Bond's loyalty. Silva leads Bond outside to a courtyard where Savarine stands beaten and tied up. Placing a shot glass atop her head, Silva challenges Bond to shoot it off. Bond misses. Silva executes her without hesitation. In a sudden surge of action, Bond overpowers Silva's men, killing them in rapid succession but deliberately sparing Silva. Producing QS radio transmitter, Bond signals his backup. Moments later, MI6 helicopters descend onto the island, securing Silva. Back in London, Silva is imprisoned inside a high-security glass cell in MI6's underground headquarters. M confronts him, and he chillingly demonstrates the failed cyanide capsule he once used in an attempt to avoid capture. The poison did not kill him, but left his face grotesquely disfigured, destroying parts of his jaw and cheekbone, forcing him to rely on a prosthetic. He blames M for abandoning him. She coldly replies that his name will be removed from MI6's memorial wall. M, shaken but resolute, leaves to attend her inquiry. Before departing, she instructs Bond and Q to analyze Silva's laptop for clues. In the tech lab, Q connects Silva's computer to the MI6 network while Bond observes. They discover layers of encrypted code, including sophisticated failsafes designed by only a handful of elite cyber operatives worldwide. Eventually, Q decrypts the files, but too late. The program was never meant to be read. It was designed to trigger. In his cell, Silva calmly adjusts his shirt as if expecting what comes next. A guard questions his movement. At the inquiry hearing, M faces sharp criticism from MP Claire Dewar and the Oversight Committee, who accuse her of negligence and mishandling security. Suddenly, technical failures ripple through MI6 systems. On QS monitor, security warnings flash, followed by a mocking message, "Not such a clever boy." Realizing Silva anticipated this, Q disconnects the system to stop the breach. Bond sprints to Silva's holding cell, but arrives seconds too late. Silva has killed his guards and escaped through a hidden floor hatch. Bond chases him through dim service corridors and into London underground tunnels. As he navigates the tracks, Q informs him that Silva planned this for years, orchestrating the bombing of MI6 headquarters and predicting every emergency response protocol. Bond struggles to unlock a service door as a train roars toward him. He fires at the lock, dives into a side tunnel, and continues pursuit. Silva ascends toward Temple Tube Station. Bond emerges into the crowded station, blending into the commuters. He asks Q to track Silva through camera feeds, uncertain which train to board. Q misses Silva slipping onto a departing train disguised as a police officer. As the train pulls away, Bond leaps forward and grabs onto the last carriage, refusing to let his enemy disappear into the city. Clinging to the outside of the departing train, Bond pulls himself inside and moves from carriage to carriage, scanning every face for Silva. The train slows as it approaches Westminster Station. At MI6 headquarters, Tanner receives urgent updates from Q confirming that Silva has escaped custody. He attempts to alert him during her parliamentary hearing, but she refuses to step away, unwilling to appear afraid. Silva and Bond exit the train at Westminster. Silva disappears into a cluster of uniformed police officers patrolling the station, briefly slipping from Bond's sight. He ducks through an unmarked door leading into a service tunnel, with Bond close behind. Back at the inquiry, MP Claire Dewar continues her criticism of Ma.'s leadership, her speech stretching on until Mallory realizes the proceedings are becoming less about oversight and more about humiliation. In the tunnels, Bond catches a glimpse of Silva climbing a ladder toward an upper level. He fires several shots but misses. Silva mocks him, then reveals a handheld detonator. With a press of a button, explosives rip through the tunnel ceiling. A train crashes spectacularly through the opening, sending debris everywhere. Bond barely avoids being crushed as Silva vanishes into the chaos. At the tribunal building, M finally takes the floor. She defends the necessity of MI6 and the Zero agents, arguing that their work remains vital in an increasingly unpredictable world. She closes her speech by quoting Tennyson, "We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven." As her final words echo through the chamber, Silva and two gunmen storm the building, shooting the security guards at the entrance. Bond bursts out of Westminster Station and sprints toward the tribunal as fast as he can. Inside the hearing room, Silva and his men open fire. Mallory shoves him to the ground just as bullets tear through the chamber. Bond kicks open a side door but arrives just as a nearby officer is shot. Thinking quickly, he fires at two fire extinguishers, filling the room with thick smoke and disrupting Silva's aim. Using the confusion to his advantage, Silva escapes to a waiting vehicle and speeds off moments before Bond reaches the street. Tanner ushers Bond into another car, and Bond takes the wheel in pursuit. During the getaway, Bond contacts Q and instructs him to fabricate a digital trail, something convincing enough to lure Silva into following it. The objective is simple: draw him somewhere isolated. Later that night, they switch vehicles to avoid surveillance. Bond chooses his classic Aston Martin DB5, satisfied that its defensive modifications are still operational. Meanwhile, Q and Tanner collaborate to create the false breadcrumb trail. Mallory, nursing an injured arm from the tribunal attack, discovers their plan but immediately understands their strategy. Rather than reprimanding them, he tells them to proceed. Bond and M travel north to Scotland, to Skyfall, Bond's childhood home. The once grand estate stands isolated against the rugged landscape. There they reunite with Kincaid, the loyal gamekeeper, who arms himself with a shotgun and offers his help. With most of the estate's firearms sold long ago, the trio prepares improvised defenses. Homemade explosives, hidden traps, and strategic choke points throughout the house. Kincaid quietly shares pieces of Bond's past with M, how his parents died when he was young, and how he once hid in the tunnel that runs from the house to a small chapel on the moors. Before the battle begins, Kincaid returns Bond's father's hunting rifle, unwilling to see it leave the family forever. Silva's first wave of mercenaries arrives and is met with a brutal welcome. Booby traps detonate, the DB5's concealed machine guns roar to life, and Kincaid proves deadly with his shotgun. The assault is repelled, but not without cost. M is struck by a bullet in the abdomen. Moments later, a second wave approaches, led by Silva himself in a helicopter. Bond orders Kincaid to escort M through the hidden tunnel while he stays behind to delay the attack. Heavy gunfire pins him down as grenades tear through what remains of the house. Thinking fast, Bond detonates gas canisters with dynamite, creating a massive explosion that destroys the helicopter and reduces much of the estate to rubble. Most of Silva's men are killed, but Silva survives. Bond escapes through the tunnel, following the same path he once used as a frightened child. In the distance, Silva notices the beam of Kincaid's flashlight and gives chase. Bond takes a shortcut across a frozen pond, but Silva intercepts him with two remaining henchmen. A brutal fight follows. Bond knocks one unconscious and drags the other beneath the icy water, holding him there until he stops struggling. Bond reaches the chapel where Silva has cornered him in a twisted display. Silva presses a gun to her hand and demands that she shoot them both, claiming it would end their suffering. Before he can act, Bond hurls a knife into Silva's back, killing him instantly. Silva is finally defeated, but it is too late to save him. Her wound proves fatal, and she dies in Bond's arms. For Bond, the victory feels hollow. Some time later, Bond returns to London. On a rooftop overlooking the city, he is greeted by Eve. She hands him a small box containing a porcelain bulldog draped in a Union Jack, a final gift from him, left to him in her will. Bond smiles faintly at the gesture. Eve reveals she has chosen to leave field duty and accept a desk position. She finally introduces herself properly, Eve Moneypenny. Bond steps through a padded leather door into a familiar office. Beyond Moneypenny's desk sits Gareth Mallory. Now officially appointed as the new M, he slides a folder across the desk and asks Bond if he is ready to return to duty. Bond answers simply, "With pleasure, sir." The story closes with a classic gun barrel sequence, a commemorative anniversary emblem, and a promise that James Bond will return. Analysis: what happens when the world's most unstoppable spy fails, not just on a mission, not just physically, but emotionally. In 2012, Skyfall didn't just give us another James Bond adventure, it challenged everything we thought we knew about Seven. This wasn't about flashy gadgets, it wasn't about smooth one-liners, and it definitely wasn't about an invincible hero walking away from explosions without a scratch. This was Bond at his lowest. For the first time in the modern era, we see Seven broken, shot, presumed dead, questioned, tested, judged. The world moves on without him, and worse, it starts asking whether he even matters anymore, and that's what makes Skyfall different. Directed by Sam Mendes and starring Daniel Craig, this film arrived during the 50th anniversary of the James Bond franchise, and instead of celebrating with pure spectacle, it did something far more daring. It made Bond human. This story isn't just about stopping a terrorist. It's about loyalty, about betrayal, about aging in a profession that worships youth, and at the heart of it all is a question that cuts deeper than any bullet. Is James Bond still relevant in a digital, cyber-driven world? Over the next few minutes, we're diving deep into Skyfall, breaking down the story, the symbolism, the emotional layers, and why many fans consider it one of the greatest Bond films ever made. Because this isn't just a spy thriller, it's a resurrection story, and by the end of it, you may never look at Seven the same way again. Before we break down the deeper layers of Skyfall, let's set the stage. Released in 2012, Skyfall marked a major turning point for the James Bond franchise. Directed by Sam Mendes and starring Daniel Craig in his third outing as Seven, this wasn't just another sequel, it was a statement. At its core, Skyfall is a spy thriller, but it's also something more. It blends high-stakes espionage with psychological drama, emotional character study, and a surprisingly personal story about loyalty and legacy. The film takes us across the globe, from a breathtaking chase through Istanbul to the neon-lit skyline of Shanghai, the mysterious casinos of Macau, the political tension of London, and finally, the cold, haunting landscapes of the Scottish Highlands. But beneath the exotic locations and explosive action lies a simple, powerful premise. When a mission goes wrong and a list of undercover agents is leaked, MI6 faces one of its greatest crises. MI6's leadership is publicly questioned. The intelligence service itself is under attack, and from the shadows emerges a cyber-terrorist with a personal vendetta. Bond, presumed dead after a disastrous operation, must return not just to stop a villain, but to protect the woman who has always sent him into danger. This isn't a mission about saving the world, it's about saving loyalty, saving trust, and ultimately saving the very idea of Seven, and that's what makes Skyfall stand apart from typical action blockbusters. It's not driven only by spectacle, it's driven by relationships. The stakes aren't just global, they're personal, and that shift changes everything. On the surface, Skyfall looks like a classic spy thriller, fast cars, exotic locations, a dangerous villain, explosions, but look closer and you'll realize this film is operating on a completely different level. Yes, it belongs to the action and espionage genre, but emotionally, it plays like a psychological drama, a character study, almost even a meditation on aging and relevance. This isn't just Bond fighting an enemy, this is Bond fighting time. One of the core themes of Skyfall is aging in a profession that worships youth. Early in the film, Bond fails his physical and psychological evaluations. He's slower, he drinks too much, his aim isn't steady. The world around him is changing, cyber warfare is replacing field agents, laptops are replacing pistols, and the question hangs heavy in the air, is Bond obsolete? But aging isn't the only theme. At the heart of the story is loyalty, specifically Bond's loyalty to M, played by Judi Dench. This relationship drives the emotional core of the film. For Silva, the villain portrayed by Javier Bardem, loyalty turned into betrayal. For Bond, loyalty becomes purpose. That contrast is everything. Where Silva sees himself as discarded by the system, Bond chooses to stand by it, even when it fails him. Then there's resurrection. Bond is literally shot, presumed dead, and returns from the shadows. It's mythic, biblical even. He falls and rises again. But he doesn't come back the same man. The emotional tone of the film reflects all of this. It's darker than traditional Bond entries, slower in places, more reflective. The action scenes are stunning, but they're framed with weight and consequence. This isn't popcorn entertainment alone. It's a story about identity, about legacy, about what happens when a legend is forced to question himself. And that's why Skyfall resonates beyond the explosions, because beneath the gunfire and glamour, it's asking something deeply human. Who are you when the world thinks you're no longer needed? Let's walk through the story of Skyfall, not just what happens, but why it matters. The film opens in Istanbul with pure adrenaline. Bond is chasing a mercenary who has stolen a hard drive containing the identities of undercover NATO agents. The pursuit moves from rooftops to motorcycles to a speeding train, classic Bond chaos. But then comes the moment that changes everything. Bond is fighting on top of the train. M is monitoring from London. The target is seconds away from escaping. She orders Eve to take the shot. It's risky. She fires. Bond is hit. He falls from the train into the river below and disappears. Officially, James Bond is dead. Months pass. MI6 is under attack. The stolen agent list is being leaked online. Headquarters is bombed. Public trust is collapsing. And M is being questioned by the government, seen as outdated, careless, part of a dying system. Then Bond returns, not dramatically, not heroically, just quietly walking back into MI6 as if nothing happened. But everything has changed. He's physically weaker. His aim is off. His psychological tests show instability. He fails the evaluations, yet M clears him for duty anyway. Why? Because she trusts him. And maybe because she has no one else. Bond tracks the cyber trail to Shanghai. In a stunning neon-lit skyscraper sequence, he eliminates a sniper connected to the mastermind. That path leads him to Macau, then finally to the true villain, Raul Silva. Silva isn't just another terrorist. He's a former MI6 agent, a ghost from MI's past. He was captured years ago during a mission gone wrong. M made a call. She sacrificed him to protect other agents. Silva survived torture, disfigurement, and betrayal, and now he wants revenge. But here's the twist. Silva wants to be captured. His arrest is part of a larger plan to escape custody and strike publicly at M. His goal isn't world domination. It's humiliation, personal destruction. He attacks a government hearing in London, where M is defending the relevance of MI6. Chaos erupts. Bond barely saves her. And then Bond makes a crucial decision. He doesn't take him to a secure bunker. He takes her off the grid, to Skyfall, his childhood home in the Scottish Highlands. This is where the film shifts from global espionage to something intimate and raw. With the help of Kincaid, the estate's old caretaker, Bond prepares the house like a fortress. No high-tech gadgets, no massive backup. Just shotguns, traps, and strategy. Silva arrives with helicopters and mercenaries. The house is destroyed in a brutal siege. Explosions tear through Bond's past, literally and symbolically. The old world burns. In the final confrontation inside a small chapel, M is fatally wounded. Bond kills Silva with a knife to the back, ending his revenge. But it comes at a cost. M dies in Bond's arms, and with her death, an era ends. This isn't just a mission completed. It's a personal loss, a transformation, because by the end of Skyfall, Bond hasn't just defeated a villain. He's survived his own fall, and he's ready to become something new. The ending of Skyfall isn't just the conclusion of a mission. It's the closing of a chapter in Bond history. After the explosive siege at Skyfall Estate, everything narrows down to something painfully intimate. No armies, no gadgets. No grand speeches, just Bond, Silva, and M inside a quiet chapel. Silva finally reaches the woman he blames for destroying his life. For him, this isn't about politics. It isn't about MI6. It's about betrayal. Years ago, M sacrificed him to protect larger interests. To Silva, that decision shattered his identity. He sees himself as discarded proof that agents are nothing more than expendable tools. But here's where the emotional contrast hits. Bond was also sent on impossible missions. Bond was also sacrificed in a sense, yet he chose loyalty. Silva chose vengeance. That's the difference between them. When Silva forces M into his final, twisted act of revenge, Bond intervenes, killing Silva with a knife to the back. It's quick, brutal, personal, but the victory doesn't feel triumphant, because M has been mortally wounded. In her final moments, she dies in Bond's arms, and symbolically, this is massive. Judi Dench had portrayed M since 1995. For audiences, she wasn't just Bond's superior. She was the emotional anchor of the franchise. Her death marks the end of an era, but here's the deeper meaning. Skyfall isn't just about falling, it's about rebirth. Bond begins the film physically broken, doubted, outdated. By the end, he's endured loss, faced his past, and proven his relevance not through perfection, but through resilience. In the final scene, Bond walks into the office of the new M. The room feels familiar. Classic wood paneling. The old leather door, it mirrors the traditional MI6 office from earlier Bond films. It's subtle, but it's intentional. This is Bond reset. The modern, vulnerable version of Seven has now evolved into the composed, iconic figure we recognize from classic entries. The old world burned down at Skyfall, but from its ashes, James Bond rises again. And that's why this ending feels so powerful. It doesn't just close a story, it rebuilds a legend. Now here's where Skyfall becomes even more fascinating. because beneath the action, the explosions, and the emotional drama, this film is layered with symbolism. Let's start with the title itself. Skyfall, on the surface, it's the name of Bond's childhood home, but metaphorically, it represents collapse, the fall of institutions, the fall of old methods, the fall of a man who believed he was unbreakable. Bond literally falls from the sky in the opening act, shot and presumed dead. M6 falls under political scrutiny. Maya's authority falls apart. Everything is crumbling, but from that collapse, something stronger is rebuilt. That's the first layer. Now look at the visuals. The Shanghai fight sequence, silhouetted against glowing neon skyscrapers, isn't just stylish cinematography, it's symbolic. Bond fights in shadows, barely visible, reflecting his uncertain place in a modern, digital world. The old-school field agent operating in a world dominated by screens and cyber warfare. Speaking of cyber warfare, Silva's entire character is symbolic. Played with chilling calm by Javier Bardem, Silva represents the new age of intelligence threats. He doesn't rely on brute strength. He uses laptops, encryption, psychological manipulation. He's what M6 fears it's becoming obsolete against. And then there's the Skyfall estate itself. The house is old, isolated, full of history. When it explodes in flames, it's more than destruction, it's a cleansing. Bond's past literally burns down. His childhood trauma, his family history, his emotional baggage, it all goes up in smoke. And after that fire, Bond is no longer hiding behind it. Even the Aston Martin DB5 isn't just fan service. It's a deliberate callback to classic Bond cinema, a reminder of where the character comes from. And when that car is destroyed, it signals something bold. Nostalgia alone can't save you. You have to evolve. There's also powerful foreshadowing throughout the film. Early dialogue about old dogs and relics of the Cold War mirrors the final act, where an aging agent defends his homeland with nothing but grit and instinct. Skyfall constantly contrasts old versus new, tradition versus technology, loyalty versus betrayal, resilience versus resentment, and in the end, the message is clear: the world changes, systems collapse, people fall. But identity, when tested, can be reforged. That's what makes Skyfall more than just a spy movie. It's a symbolic rebirth disguised as an action thriller. Now let's step behind the curtain, because the story behind Skyfall is almost as compelling as the film itself. First, timing. Skyfall wasn't just another Bond sequel. It was released in 2012 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the James Bond franchise. That's 5 decades of espionage history. And instead of playing it safe with a nostalgic tribute, the filmmakers chose to reinvent the character while honoring his roots. That balance is incredibly hard to pull off. The film was directed by Sam Mendes, a surprising choice at the time. Mendes was known for dramatic films, not action blockbusters, but that's exactly why Skyfall feels different. He approached Bond as a character first, action icon second, and then there's the cinematography. Legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins brought an almost painterly quality to the film, the Shanghai skyscraper fight scene. Shot with silhouettes and neon reflections, the burning Skyfall estate, lit like a tragic opera. Deakins received an Academy Award nomination for his work, and many argue he deserved the win. Now let's talk about the villain. Javier Bardem crafted Silva as something unsettlingly calm. He wasn't loud or chaotic. He was composed, theatrical, almost playful, which made him even more dangerous. Bardem has mentioned that he wanted Silva to feel unpredictable, like someone who could smile warmly one second and destroy you the next. And that blonde hair, completely intentional. It makes Silva stand out visually, almost ghost-like, as if he's already halfway between life and death. Here's another major milestone. Skyfall became the first Bond film in history to cross $1 billion at the global box office. That's not just success, that's cultural impact. And we can't forget the music. Adele's theme song, Skyfall, didn't just top charts, it won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. The haunting vocals and dramatic orchestration perfectly matched the film's tone of legacy and loss. Even small details were carefully designed. The return of the Aston Martin DB5 wasn't random nostalgia. It was a tribute to classic Bond, while reminding audiences how far the character had evolved. Everything about Skyfall was intentional. From the casting choices to the lighting to the music, this wasn't just a blockbuster. It was a celebration of Bond's past and a bold step into his future. And that's why, behind the scenes, Skyfall feels just as legendary as what we see on screen. To truly understand how powerful Skyfall is, we have to compare it, because this film doesn't just exist on its own. It stands in conversation with every Bond movie before it and every spy thriller around it. Let's start with the obvious comparison, Casino Royale. Casino Royale rebuilt Bond from the ground up. It showed us his origin, his emotional awakening, his first heartbreak. It was raw, intense, physical. But Skyfall. Skyfall is about reflection. Where Casino Royale asks, how does Bond become Seven? Skyfall asks, what happens when Seven starts to fade? Then there's Quantum of Solace. That film was fast, aggressive, almost relentless in its pacing, but it lacked emotional depth for many viewers. Skyfall corrected that. It slowed down, it breathed, it allowed silence to speak louder than explosions. Instead of chasing momentum, it built atmosphere. And that patience made it more powerful. Now step outside the Bond franchise. Silva, played by Javier Bardem, often gets compared to modern cinematic villains like the Joker in The Dark Knight. Not because they're identical, but because they're driven by chaos and personal ideology rather than money or power. Silva isn't trying to rule the world, he wants to prove a point. That emotional motivation makes him far more dangerous. Even the final act, the siege at Skyfall, feels different from traditional Bond endings. Instead of an underwater lair or space station battle, we get a stripped-down, almost Old Western-style last stand. It's intimate, brutal, grounded. Compared to earlier Bond films filled with gadgets and over-the-top villains, Skyfall feels mature. It respects the formula, but isn't trapped by it, and within the Bond legacy itself. Many fans place Skyfall alongside the very best entries ever made, not because it's the flashiest, not because it has the biggest explosions, but because it dares to ask deeper questions about identity and loyalty. Where other Bond films entertained, Skyfall evolved, and that's why it doesn't just compete with other spy films. It stands above most of them. When Skyfall hit theaters in 2012, it didn't just perform well, it dominated. This wasn't just another successful Bond movie, it became a cultural moment. Financially, the film crossed the $1 billion mark worldwide, making it the highest-grossing James Bond film at the time. That milestone alone proved something important. Bond wasn't outdated. He was evolving, and audiences were fully on board. Critics were equally impressed. Reviewers praised the emotional depth, the cinematography, and the layered performance by Daniel Craig. Many noted that this was the most mature Bond film ever made, one that balanced blockbuster spectacle with genuine character development. And then there was Silva. Javier Bardem's performance was widely celebrated as one of the best Bond villains in decades. Calm, disturbing, theatrical, he didn't just oppose Bond, he mirrored him. The film received multiple Academy Award nominations and won 2, including Best Original Song for Adele's haunting theme. But here's where it gets interesting. While the majority praised its darker tone, some longtime fans were divided. A small group felt the film leaned too heavily into drama. They missed the lighter charm and gadget-heavy escapism of earlier Bond eras, and that debate is part of what makes Skyfall fascinating. Is it the best Bond film ever made? For many, yes. For others, it's a bold reinvention that sacrifices some traditional fun for emotional weight. But even those who criticize it admit one thing: it changed the franchise. It proved that a 50-year-old spy series could still feel relevant, cinematic, and emotionally compelling in a modern era of superhero blockbusters. Underrated? Not at all. Overrated? That depends on who you ask, but unforgettable. Absolutely. So after all the explosions, after the betrayal, after the fall and the fire, was Skyfall worth it? Absolutely. But not just for the reasons you might expect. Yes, the action sequences are stunning. Yes, the cinematography is breathtaking. Yes, the villain is unforgettable. But Skyfall succeeds because it dares to go deeper. Its greatest strength is emotional weight. This is a Bond film that isn't afraid of silence, isn't afraid of vulnerability, isn't afraid to let its hero fail before he rises again. Daniel Craig delivers one of the most layered performances of his tenure, balancing toughness with quiet fragility. And the dynamic between Bond and M gives the story real stakes that feel personal, not just global. Visually, the film is almost poetic. Every frame feels intentional. Every location adds mood and meaning. But it's not perfect. The middle section moves at a slower pace than traditional Bond films. If you're looking purely for non-stop gadget-driven spectacle, this entry might feel restrained. And that's the key word: restrained. Skyfall isn't trying to overwhelm you with excess. It's trying to leave an impact. So who should watch this film? If you love character-driven action, if you appreciate stories about legacy and identity, if you want to see James Bond tested, not just physically, but emotionally, this is essential viewing. For longtime fans, it's a respectful evolution of the character. For newcomers, it's an accessible, powerful entry point. In the end, Skyfall isn't just one of the best films of the Daniel Craig era. It's one of the most important films in the entire Bond legacy, because it doesn't just entertain, it redefines what Seven can be. And that's a mission accomplished. REVIWS. I've always had a deep appreciation for the James Bond franchise. Over the years, most of the films have meant a great deal to me. My favorite Bond remains Sean Connery, and Goldfinger still stands as my personal top entry in the series. That said, I genuinely admire Daniel Craig's interpretation of Seven. He possesses undeniable charisma, and there's something captivating about his piercing gaze that commands attention. For me, Skyfall represents Craig at his very best. I enjoyed Casino Royale and found Quantum of Solace rather forgettable, but Skyfall ranks among the strongest installments in the entire franchise. Craig fully embodies Bond here, combining elegance and charm with a hardened edge and emotional depth. His performance feels like a respectful nod to the actors who came before him, while still making the role entirely his own. The supporting cast is equally impressive. Albert Finney brings gravitas as always, and Naomi Harris is both poised and magnetic. It was especially gratifying to see Ralph Fiennes in a role that truly utilizes his talents, something that hasn't always been the case in recent years. However, the real standouts are Judi Dench and Javier Bardem. Dench delivers one of her finest performances as M, giving the character new layers of vulnerability and strength. Bardem's Silva may not quite reach the legendary heights of villains like Goldfinger, Blofeld, Rosa Klebb, or Jaws, but he is a formidable adversary in his own right. There's a theatrical menace to him, almost reminiscent of a sly, unsettling Hannibal Lecter. He relishes every line, injecting the film with a sinister and memorable presence. I've always enjoyed the Bond girls, from Pussy Galore and Solitaire to Vesper Lynd and Electra King. Savrine earns her place among them, mysterious, stylish, and undeniably glamorous. Visually, Skyfall is stunning. The cinematography is sleek and refined, and the locations are breathtaking. The opening sequence in Istanbul, particularly the rooftop chase and the train confrontation, delivers edge-of-your-seat excitement. Longtime fans will also appreciate the return of the classic Aston Martin DB5, a wonderful tribute to the franchise's heritage. Sam Mendes taking the director's chair was a bold choice. His style could have clashed with the Bond formula, but instead, he strikes a remarkable balance. He blends his character-driven storytelling with classic Seven spectacle, resulting in a film that feels both intimate and epic. The relationship between Bond and M is explored with surprising emotional weight, arguably more depth than in previous Craig entries or even many of the Brosnan-era films. The climax is genuinely shocking and unexpectedly moving. The theme song performed by Adele is powerful and emotionally resonant. While it may not quite reach the iconic status of classics like Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, Diamonds Are Forever, or On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it surpasses themes such as Die Another Day or Octopussy by a considerable margin. The musical score complements the film beautifully, delivering suspense, emotion, and energy, even if it doesn't attempt to replicate John Barry's signature touch. The screenplay is sharp and intelligent, filled with witty exchanges and meaningful dialogue. Bardem gets many of the standout lines, but every major character is given moments that matter. Overall, Skyfall feels like a triumphant chapter for the franchise. After feeling uncertain following Quantum of Solace, this film restored my confidence in the direction of the series. The first half delivers the sleek, polished spectacle audiences expect, complete with striking action moments like Bond leaping onto a moving train and casually adjusting his jacket before striding forward. Yet the film gradually shifts in tone. As the story retreats to the isolated Scottish estate and the legendary Aston Martin returns, the narrative becomes more grounded and personal. The improvised traps during the final showdown may feel slightly out of place, almost veering into Home Alone territory, but they don't significantly detract from the emotional intensity of the finale. With Daniel Craig, the franchise truly finds its rhythm again. As for Miss Moneypenny, there's always been debate about whether Moneypenny is a code name, similar to M or Q. The same question arises regarding Bond himself, especially given the multiple actors portraying him over 5 decades. Officially, within the continuity of the Craig films, Bond is a single individual rather than a rotating identity. M and Q are clearly titles passed down, but Moneypenny is generally treated as a specific character rather than a codename. Still, the mystery surrounding identities in such a secretive organization has always added to the intrigue of the series. For Judi Dench's portrayal of M, the film's central tension rests squarely on her shoulders. With her position under scrutiny and ghosts from her past resurfacing, she faces perhaps the most personal and dangerous adversary of her career. Early on, she's heard over the phone instructing a field agent named Eve to take a risky shot while Bond is locked in combat with a suspect. The result leaves Bond presumed dead. When he resurfaces following a devastating attack on the M6 headquarters, their reunion is far from warm. Both are unsettled, M by his unexpected return, and Bond by the sweeping changes within the agency, including younger bureaucrats who question his relevance and insist that sensitive files are for her eyes only. A sly comment about the era of exploding pens being over adds a welcome touch of humor, proving that the script hasn't abandoned wit entirely. Daniel Craig's Bond leans on that dry humor to survive what ultimately becomes a deeply emotional journey. The film's final act delivers a poignant turn, not staged for shock value, but as a sobering reminder of the hazards tied to espionage. For this interpretation of Bond, it signals the closing of a chapter. Naomi Harris appears as Eve, introduced in the thick of the action rather than through elaborate exposition. She's immediately thrown into high-pressure fieldwork, juggling a firearm, a moving vehicle, and direct orders from M, all at once. Javier Bardem, meanwhile, fully embraces a disturbingly theatrical villain. His character shares a complicated history with M, seeing her as both a maternal figure and the source of his vendetta. Ralph Fiennes contributes in a measured supporting role, and Albert Finney later steps in for a brief but meaningful appearance. The film delivers its expected share of large-scale action, from Bond scrambling atop a speeding train to confrontations staged in striking international locales. Visually, it's polished and grand. Yet there's an unmistakably somber undertone throughout. Among the Bond entries up to this point, this one feels the most haunting, particularly due to its closing developments. Unlike many standalone installments, it directly feeds into what follows, echoing the serialized approach not seen since Moonraker. While this latest outing for Seven doesn't quite reinvent the franchise in the same groundbreaking way Casino Royale did, with its raw intensity and emotional depth, it is undeniably an improvement over Quantum of Solace. Craig's third performance introduces a noticeably different angle. This Bond is aging, weathered, and increasingly viewed as outdated in a modern world driven by youth and technology. The transition feels abrupt, but it pushes the series into fresh thematic territory. Interestingly, the film also reintroduces classic elements that earlier entries had deliberately sidelined. Q returns reimagined through Ben Wishaw's youthful, tech-savvy take, alongside familiar names like Moneypenny, iconic vehicles, and gadgetry. Seeing these staples make a comeback so soon after being discarded may feel slightly inconsistent, but they're integrated with restraint rather than camp. The central storyline, however, is more straightforward than it initially appears. Beneath the stylish presentation lies a fairly basic revenge narrative. An early subplot involving Bond's disappearance ultimately serves little purpose beyond padding the runtime. At nearly 2.5 hours, the pacing occasionally drags, losing momentum where it should accelerate. On the plus side, the action sequences are staged with far greater clarity than in the previous installment. Director Sam Mendes avoids the frantic, shaky camera approach that hampered earlier efforts, opting instead for expansive, meticulously composed set pieces. The opening chase is electrifying, and the climactic showdown carries explosive intensity. A sequence set in the London Underground stands out, while a detour to Shanghai, though visually striking, feels somewhat less impactful. The visual effects are undeniably prominent, but they enhance rather than overwhelm the spectacle. Performance-wise, the film presents a mixed bag. For the first time in Craig's tenure, Bond comes across as less charismatic. His trademark quips sometimes land with an air of smugness instead of charm, and the screenplay's occasional fixation on overly clever dialogue can feel self-conscious. Even so, the film remains a compelling, visually impressive chapter in the Bond saga, one that blends nostalgia with introspection, spectacle with melancholy, and signals a significant turning point for the character and the franchise alike. Directed by Sam Mendes, Skyfall marks Daniel Craig's third outing as James Bond, and arguably one of the franchise's most visually striking chapters. The story opens with a botched mission in Istanbul that leaves Bond presumed dead after failing to recover a hard drive containing the identities of undercover agents. Back in London, M, played once again by Judi Dench, finds herself under political and personal attack as a cyber-terrorist known as Silva emerges. Silva, portrayed by Javier Bardem, is a former agent with a vendetta rooted in betrayal. Craig continues to shape Bond into a more emotionally layered figure. His portrayal leans into vulnerability and weariness, giving the character a depth sometimes missing in earlier iterations. It's a performance that feels confident and committed, reinforcing Craig standing among the most compelling Bonds. Dench brings gravitas to M, though at times her portrayal feels familiar, echoing the stern authority she has embodied in prior entries. Still, this installment grants her more narrative weight, allowing her character's past decisions to drive the story forward. Among the supporting cast, Ralph Fiennes and Rory Kinnear provide solid additions to M. Essex's ranks, while Ben Whishaw introduces a modernized Q with refreshing energy. Naomi Harris delivers a capable performance, though her character occasionally feels underwritten. Bérénice Marlohe leaves a strong impression as a mysterious femme fatale, even if her screen time is frustratingly brief. Bardem's Silva is certainly memorable, though his theatrical delivery sometimes veers toward exaggeration. While his presence is magnetic, the character might have benefited from more restraint and perhaps more time on-screen. Visually, Skyfall is among the most polished entries in the series. The neon-lit sequences in Shanghai and the atmospheric Scottish finale showcase meticulous craftsmanship. Mendes infuses the film with elegance and a contemporary tone while still tipping his hat to classic Bond traditions. Yet the film shares a flaw common to several later installments: length. The action scenes, while expertly staged, occasionally stretch beyond necessity. At times, the narrative meanders, sending Bond across the globe in ways that dilute momentum. There's spectacle in abundance, but occasionally at the expense of pacing. That said, the opening and closing sequences are especially powerful, delivering some of the franchise's most memorable action beats. For longtime fans, especially those who remember watching entries like Dr. No or seeing the series evolve through the late 70s and 80s, Skyfall feels almost surreal. Here is a Bond film directed by an Academy Award winner, earning Oscars of its own, and crossing the billion-dollar mark worldwide. It represents a moment where the franchise not only endured but thrived in a modern blockbuster era. While plot gaps and narrative excesses occasionally surface, Skyfall remains a gripping and stylish chapter in the Seven saga. It successfully deepens its characters, modernizes its tone, and delivers high-caliber performances. It may not be the definitive Bond film, but it stands comfortably among the most engaging and accomplished entries in the series, proof that even after decades, James Bond can still surprise us. Released as a Golden Jubilee celebration of the Seven series, Skyfall confidently nods to the past, while pushing its central character into new emotional territory. The timeline of the franchise has always been flexible, and here we see Daniel Craig's once rookie Bond, introduced in Casino Royale, now worn down, bruised, and quietly questioning his purpose. At one point, he's practically encouraged to step aside. The film also restores some beloved traditions. A fresh, tech-savvy Q returns to the fold, Miss Moneypenny is reintroduced with a modern twist, and a new M looms in the wings. These reappearances feel less like nostalgia grabs and more like careful acknowledgments of 5 decades of cinematic history. Subtle references to earlier Bond adventures are sprinkled throughout, rewarding longtime fans. Visually, the movie is a standout. Cinematographer Roger Deakins delivers striking imagery, from neon-lit cityscapes to misty Scottish highlands, that elevates the material. Director Sam Mendes brings a dramatic sensibility uncommon in the franchise, carving out meaningful character moments. Especially for Judi Dench's M, her quietly powerful recitation of Tennyson adds unexpected gravitas. That said, the pacing falters slightly midway through. An additional major action beat could have tightened the narrative drive. Still, the film balances spectacle, explosions, international chases, and high-stakes confrontations, with introspection more effectively than most entries in the series. One striking twist: this may be the rare Bond story where the villain essentially accomplishes his mission. Javier Bardem's Silva is theatrical yet menacing, a former M6 operative betrayed by M and consumed by vengeance. His presence gives the film a deeply personal antagonist, raising the emotional stakes. The plot kicks off when a classified M6 hard drive containing the identities of NATO agents is stolen. Bond pursues the culprit through Istanbul alongside Field Agent Eve. A critical miscalculation leads to Bond being shot and presumed dead. In his absence, M6 suffers cyberattacks, an explosion devastates headquarters, and the agency is forced into an old wartime bunker once used during Churchill's era. As agents are exposed and killed, MI6 leadership is scrutinized by Gareth Mallory, Ralph Fiennes. Then, unexpectedly, Bond resurfaces. His investigation leads him to the enigmatic Savarine Bérénice Marlohe, and ultimately to Silva, whose vendetta against M drives the narrative toward its explosive and emotionally charged finale. One reliable way to judge a Bond film is by how memorable its settings are, and Skyfall delivers. From sleek Asian skyscrapers glowing against the night, to the chilling waters of a climactic showdown, to the haunting Scottish estate that gives the film its title, each locale feels purposeful. The London Underground sequence is particularly effective, reinforcing how deeply this installment is rooted in British identity. Few Bond films feel as unmistakably London-centric as this one. After a long gap between installments, expectations were high and largely met. While some viewers took issue with the darker tone and reduced emphasis on witty British charm, the film's ambition and craftsmanship are undeniable. It successfully commemorates Bond's 50-year cinematic legacy without relying solely on nostalgia. Compared to later entries like Spectre or even Quantum of Solace, Skyfall stands taller in terms of emotional depth and visual impact. Is it flawless? No, but as both a celebration and a character study, it's a compelling and memorable chapter in the Seven saga. Motorcycle enthusiasts also get their share of excitement thanks to a breathtaking chase sequence that ranks among the film's most thrilling moments. Sequences like these are a big part of why the movie is held in such high regard and continues to be admired by audiences. Beyond the action, though, the film shines through its characters. The introduction of Moneypenny, Ralph Fiennes' character and his eventual position, as well as the powerful moments featuring Judi Dench's M, arguably the most iconic and senior Bond girl ever, all add genuine depth. Character development is something I personally felt was lacking in the most recent Bond installment, even for Bond himself, who here is portrayed as a man forced to rediscover his resilience and strength. And then, of course, there is Silva. Javier Bardem doesn't physically appear until roughly the midpoint of the film. His presence is felt long before that, but it takes about 70 minutes before we actually meet him face to face. Once he steps onto the screen, however, the entire movie seems to rise to another level. Bond villains often lean into eccentricity, and Silva embraces that tradition, yet he remains grounded enough to feel believable. In that sense, he's at least as captivating as Le Chiffre was in Casino Royale. Striking the balance between theatrical flair and realism isn't easy, but this film manages it beautifully. I wish I could say the same about Christoph Waltz's portrayal in the newer installment. Silva delivers countless unforgettable scenes, from his distinctive blonde hair contrasting with his Hispanic roots, to his unsettling charm, the artificial teeth, and the dramatic music blaring as he and his men approach Skyfall. Every detail strengthens his presence. His performance truly felt award-worthy, and it's disappointing he didn't receive an Oscar nomination, though he likely came close. His introduction scene alone is masterful. The steady, unmoving camera as Silva slowly approaches Bond, while recounting his chilling rat metaphor, builds immense tension. Even more cleverly, the metaphor circles back to Bond's final words to him. The elevator moment further amplifies the suspense. That deliberate camera choice stands out as one of the most striking shots in the entire film. At around the 90-minute mark, it becomes clear, yet again, that M6 has serious issues with keeping prisoners contained. Escapes seem to happen with remarkable frequency in these stories. Perhaps that's an area they should improve. On a more positive note, other members of the production team found more success during awards season. The film shared the Oscar for sound editing with Zero Dark 30, which felt fully deserved given its outstanding technical craftsmanship. Adele also earned both an Academy Award and a Golden Globe for the phenomenal title song, which perfectly complements the film's tone. This was my second viewing of Skyfall. I first experienced it in theaters in 2012, and it undeniably benefits from the grandeur of the big screen. That said, it remains a superb example of refined filmmaking, no matter the screen size. Some critics argue that this version of Bond strays too far from the traditional formula. They might not be entirely wrong. Still, I genuinely appreciate the modern interpretation just as much as the classic approach. The film even nods cleverly to the franchise's past, the exploding pen reference being a great example. There's also plenty of sharp humor sprinkled throughout, often delivered through witty dialogue. Judi Dench's M refusing to turn her back on her interrogator, and Bond casually mentioning, "He just took a little swim," are great moments. And of course, the unforgettable line, "I like you better without your Beretta." That exchange, shared with Bérénice Marlohe's character, arguably the closest thing to a traditional Bond girl in the film, adds both charm and poignancy. Her sudden disappearance in a shocking twist underscores just how ruthless Silva truly is. Moneypenny's portrayal here marks her as a second Bond girl of sorts, and that's actually one of the few aspects I liked less. On this point, I lean more toward the older films. While I understand the effort to modernize her character and emphasize empowerment, I always felt Moneypenny worked best as the clever, playful secretary at headquarters, especially in the portrayals from the 1970s, 1980s, and even during the Brosnan era. Those versions still gave her memorable moments, without transforming her into a field operative. Seeing her appear during the courtroom shootout, and even during Bond's fight in the pit overseas felt excessive. Sometimes less truly is more. Her appearance, totally fine with me, it doesn't really matter in the bigger picture. What stood out more was how many direct, one-on-one confrontations Bond gets into this time. He squares off twice with the same brute, first on top of a speeding train and later high above the ground in that tower. And then there's the tense showdown in the pit with the Komodo dragons. The way the villain gets dragged away there was wild. Those creatures are incredibly powerful and strangely captivating. Honestly, the name dragon suits them perfectly, even without the fire breathing. Back to those personal duels. In a way, the Bond versus Silva dynamic fits this pattern too. Sure, both men have people working for them, but at heart they're isolated gunslingers. Neither seems comfortable letting others get too close. Interestingly, once Silva takes center stage, the traditional henchman figure kind of disappears. His people are everywhere, yet they're faceless. We never learn much about them. The spotlight stays firmly on him. Visually, the movie delivers some stunning imagery. One of my favorite shots is when Bond stands atop the skyscraper after the villain's fall, a reversal from the earlier train fight where Bond is the one who plunges. Across from him stands Savarine, watching. It's a quiet, powerful first meeting, and it makes her fate all the more tragic. Unlike many Bond women, she doesn't get a fairy tale ending. Then again, she's far from the first to meet a grim fate. Bond's sharp remark about a drink right afterward suggests either emotional distance, or maybe he's masking his true reaction in front of Silva. Speaking of Bond women, Judi Dench's M might actually be the most significant female presence in the film, despite the lack of romance. If you read between the lines, there's even a hint of deeper emotional history involving her and Silva, almost a twisted parent-child dynamic. Her fate doesn't end happily either. On a first watch, it's shocking, but revisiting the film, you can see the clues. Her past decisions weigh heavily, her connection to Silva, once like a surrogate son, her order to Moneypenny to take a risky shot that nearly costs Bond his life, and earlier, her insistence that Bond press on with the mission, even if it means leaving a wounded agent behind. The objective this time is a digital list containing the identities of undercover MI6 operatives. Some names are leaked, I believe 5, though we never learn exactly what happens to them. That thread alone could have fueled multiple spin-offs. By the end, Ralph Fiennes steps in as the new M, signaling a fresh chapter and new threats ahead. It wasn't always certain he'd take the role, though his character's name, Mallory, might have tipped observant viewers off. What was clear is that Dench's era was ending, handled with dignity, but definitive nonetheless. And yes, it's amusing that both M and Moneypenny share that same initial, something I hadn't really considered before. Before wrapping up, I have to highlight Javier Bardem's performance. He's remarkably versatile, and it's always satisfying to see an international actor command such a major Hollywood franchise. The styling choices, the pale blonde hair, even the lightened eyebrows, make Silva visually unforgettable. That disturbing moment when he removes his dental piece, giving his face a warped, almost shark-like quality, is chilling. But beyond makeup, it's Bardem's physicality, especially his eyes and subtle expressions, that truly define the character. He transforms completely. It's hard to picture anyone else pulling it off with the same intensity. And despite its nearly 2.5-hour runtime, noticeably longer than the previous installment, the film never feels bloated. The pacing stays tight, and it remains engaging from start to finish, deserving running time. I'm genuinely pleased they resisted the urge to trim this film down. Every minute feels earned. It's gripping, polished, smartly written, and performed with conviction, pretty much everything you'd hope for in a blockbuster thriller. I'd absolutely recommend giving it your time. Skyfall delivers one of the most memorable set pieces in the franchise, that breathtaking sequence in the London Underground. I've often joked about how satisfying it would be to glide down one of those impossibly long escalators while commuters stare in disbelief. Here, James Bond, played for the third time by Daniel Craig, and the calculating Silva, brought to life by Javier Bardem, practically turn that fantasy into cinematic reality. It's a standout moment, slick, inventive, and visually bold. Part of me mischievously imagined an extra scene, perhaps tucked into the bonus features, where Silva channels a touch of Anton Chigurh energy, a sly nod to No Country for Old Men, while dealing with pushy commuters who mistake arrogance for urgency. The suited executives elbowing their way forward, the grumbling passenger furious about missing a train arriving in 3 minutes. It would have been darkly amusing. The Scottish Highlands setting is breathtaking, even more so when you learn that Bond's childhood estate wasn't actually in Scotland at all, but constructed in Surrey. Movie magic at its finest. Another compelling element is the political undercurrent. Gareth Mallory, chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, steps into the role of M, played with restrained authority by Ralph Fiennes. It's a subtle but meaningful shift in the power structure. Meanwhile, Judi Dench gives what might be her strongest performance as M. The film gives her emotional weight and narrative importance that elevates the entire story. Compared to Quantum of Solace, which leaned into grit but sometimes felt like connective tissue between action beats, this film doubles down on introspection. It's noticeably lighter on spectacle and heavier on theme. Legacy, loyalty, aging, betrayal, these ideas take center stage. Bond himself feels worn down, physically and emotionally. Interestingly, the villain mirrors him in several ways. Both men carry scars inflicted by the same authority figure. That said, while I admired the ambition, I occasionally found myself wanting more impact. Some action scenes didn't quite deliver the thrill I expected, and the slower, reflective stretches, though meaningful, sometimes felt restrained rather than powerful. A few additional dialogue-heavy confrontations, like the tense first meeting between Bond and Silva, would have deepened the psychological edge even further. Still, this entry stands as one of the boldest in the series. It doesn't entirely resemble a traditional Bond film, especially in its closing moments. Aside from the iconic Aston Martin, it almost feels like a reinvention. For some longtime fans, that departure might disappoint. Personally, that's exactly why it resonates with me. While Spectre returns to a more classic formula, I prefer the risks taken here. This is Bond reimagined, less about gadgets and glamour, more about consequence and character. It may not thrill at every turn, but it lingers. And sometimes, that's the more lasting victory. This entry in the Bond franchise embraces a noticeably darker and more grounded atmosphere. While I've appreciated the more serious direction introduced during Daniel Craig's era, I did find myself wishing for a little more of the high-energy flair that defined the exhilarating opening sequence. The film certainly offers thrilling moments, but some of the action scenes feel restrained, lacking the spark and spectacle audiences might expect. The finale, in particular, has divided viewers. Some feel it doesn't quite deliver the payoff it builds toward. Personally, I found it satisfying, though I understand the criticism. Where the film occasionally falters is in its plotting. Certain narrative conveniences stand out more than they should in a story that strives for realism. Silva's seemingly flawless foresight, down to predicting the exact underground chamber where Bond would confront him, is glossed over rather casually. Likewise, Bond's survival, recovery, and sudden return to form are treated almost as background details, brushed aside without much explanation. In the lighter Roger Moore era, such leaps might have blended in seamlessly, but within this grittier tone, they become more noticeable. Despite these shortcomings, the movie remains compelling, largely due to the strength of its cast. Daniel Craig delivers one of his most vulnerable performances as Seven, portraying a Bond who feels worn down and tested. Judi Dench elevates her role as M, giving the character emotional weight and agency beyond a typical supporting figure. However, it is Javier Bardem who truly steals the show. His portrayal of Raul Silva balances cold calculation with theatrical menace. He manages to inject both psychological damage and simmering rage into his performance, making Silva one of the most memorable adversaries of the Craig era. Naomi Harris, though promising, isn't given as much material as she could have been, while Bérénice Marlohe adds a touch of tragic elegance to her role. Ralph Fiennes proves to be a strong addition to the ensemble, fitting naturally into the evolving MI6 hierarchy. From a technical standpoint, the film is striking. Sam Mendes' direction leans heavily into atmosphere, and while I'm not entirely convinced by every creative choice, the visual presentation is exceptional. Cinematographer Roger Deakins crafts stunning imagery throughout, whether it's the muted, somber tones of a remote Scottish chapel or the dazzling neon glow of a fight sequence in Shanghai. The editing complements these visuals effectively, ensuring the film maintains a steady rhythm and visual clarity. Overall, Skyfall stands as one of the more ambitious installments in the James Bond series. It distances itself further from the gadget-heavy playfulness of earlier entries and instead focuses on character, consequence, and emotional stakes. Not all of the writing fully supports the weighty tone, and some action sequences could have been more dynamic, but the film succeeds because of its performances and craftsmanship. It may not be the most crowd-pleasing Bond adventure, yet it is arguably one of the more thoughtful and layered ones. The story begins in Istanbul, where Bond is assigned to retrieve a stolen hard drive containing the identities of undercover agents. The mission spirals out of control, leading to catastrophic consequences as agents are systematically targeted and eliminated. With MI6 under siege and M receiving cryptic threats from a former operative with a vendetta, Bond's loyalty is pushed to its limits. His pursuit takes him from London to Shanghai and beyond, uncovering a deeply personal conflict at the heart of the chaos. This marks Daniel Craig's third appearance as Seven, following Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace and preceding Spectre. His portrayal continues to redefine Bond as a more human and fallible figure. Opposite him, Bardem Silva is a calculating and deeply disturbed ex-agent determined to settle old scores, regardless of the collateral damage. Supported by a strong ensemble, including Judi Dench as M, Ralph Fiennes as Gareth Mallory, Naomi Harris as Eve, Ben Whishaw as the new Q, Rory Kinnear as Tanner, and Bérénice Marlohe as the ill-fated Bond woman, the film blends character drama with espionage spectacle. In the end, this installment offers a tense, visually impressive, and performance-driven chapter in the Bond saga. While not flawless, it is bold in its tone and memorable in its execution. This grand-scale installment in the long-running spy saga was produced by the franchise's longtime custodians, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, who carried forward the legacy of her father, Albert R. Broccoli. Visually, the film is nothing short of stunning. The cinematography, crafted by the exceptionally talented Roger Deakins, captures breathtaking sequences across Istanbul, Shanghai, the Scottish Highlands, and London. Each location is framed with elegance and atmosphere. Complementing the visuals is a powerful and emotionally charged score by Thomas Newman, a frequent collaborator of director Sam Mendes, whose music heightens both the tension and the drama. Sam Mendes directs with assurance and polish. Known for acclaimed works such as American Beauty, Road to Perdition, Jarhead, and Revolutionary Road, Mendes brings a refined storytelling approach to the Bond universe. His direction balances character depth with spectacle, something that elevates this entry beyond a standard action thriller. That said, there are moments that require the audience to suspend disbelief entirely. The opening sequence is a perfect example. Bond races a motorcycle toward a barrier, deliberately launching himself onto a moving train to confront his target. Shortly after, he is accidentally shot by his fellow agent, plunges from an enormous height into a river, and disappears over a waterfall. Presumed dead, he later reappears, astonishingly, shown calmly swimming laps in a pool, as if recovering from nothing more than mild exhaustion. It's one of those cinematic leaps of logic that viewers are clearly not meant to question too closely. When ranking the Bond films by audience reception, Casino Royale and Skyfall consistently appear near the top. This likely reflects viewers' appetite for high-stakes action and daring, near-impossible stunts as much as it does appreciation for Daniel Craig's portrayal. To Craig's credit, he reshaped Bond into a more brooding, emotionally complex figure, moving away from the gadget-heavy, light-hearted tone of earlier eras. Even so, it sometimes feels as though his interpretation could benefit from brief flashes of warmth or levity. Unrelenting seriousness can make the character feel distant. Interestingly, the film pushes Bond's emotional boundaries further than ever before. The climactic death of M is particularly striking. Watching Bond openly grieve is a rare and unexpected moment in the franchise, offering evidence that beneath the hardened exterior lies genuine vulnerability. As the series moves forward, it raises curiosity about how Craig's Bond will continue to evolve, especially considering the physical and psychological toll shown here. It's remarkable to reflect that the character, introduced to audiences in 1962, has endured through decades of reinvention, portrayed by multiple actors while remaining culturally iconic. The story itself follows Bond and Field Agent Eve as they pursue a mercenary responsible for stealing a hard drive containing the identities of undercover NATO operatives. During a tense rooftop and train chase, Bond is mistakenly shot by Eve under orders from M believed dead. He disappears while M6 faces political scrutiny and devastating attacks. When the agency's headquarters is bombed and classified data is leaked, Bond resurfaces and returns to London. Assisted by the new Q, who equips him with a streamlined set of tools including a Walther PPK, Bond tracks the trail from Shanghai to Macau, attempting to prevent further assassinations. Though he fails to interrogate the assassin after a fatal fall, a clue hidden in the man's equipment case propels the investigation forward. Overall, this installment combines spectacle, emotion, and legacy in a way that both honors the franchise's past and signals a darker, more introspective direction for its future. Following the trail of a casino chip, Bond tracks it to a glamorous high-stakes venue where he encounters the mysterious woman he glimpsed during the failed assassination of Patris, Séverine Bérénice Marlohe. She warns him that danger surrounds him and hints that she might help, but only if he eliminates her powerful employer. After a brutal confrontation with armed henchmen and a tense escape involving a Komodo dragon, Bond joins her aboard her yacht. By morning, they are delivered as captives to a deserted island city. There, Bond finally comes face to face with the architect of the M6 bombing, the calculating and theatrical Raul Silva, BAFTA nominee Javier Bardem. Silva reveals he was once an MI6 operative under MIA's authority, but after betrayal, imprisonment, and torture by the Chinese, he now seeks vengeance. In a chilling display of cruelty, Silva executes Severine. Unbeknownst to him, Bond has already activated a distress beacon, leading to Silva's capture. Imprisoned in a high-security glass cell, Silva appears contained, until QS attempt to decrypt data from Silva's laptop unintentionally triggers a cyber breach, allowing him to escape through the London underground. Bond gives chase as Silva advances his plan to assassinate M during an official inquiry. With assistance from Mallory, Eve, and MI6 aide Tanner, Rory Kinnear, the attack is thwarted. Recognizing that M remains a target, Bond makes a bold decision. He takes her off the grid. Driving the iconic Aston Martin DB5, they retreat to Bond's childhood estate in Scotland, Skyfall. There, the loyal groundskeeper Kincaid, Albert Finney, arms them with old hunting rifles and supplies. Bond prepares the property with improvised traps, turning the quiet manor into a battleground. When Silva and his mercenaries descend upon the estate, an explosive firefight erupts. M and Kincaid escape through a hidden tunnel toward a nearby chapel, while Bond narrowly survives the destruction of Skyfall itself, including a perilous fight beneath cracking ice. Inside the chapel, Silva corners M, discovering she is gravely wounded. Before he can finish his revenge, Bond strikes from behind, ending Silva's vendetta with a knife. M shares a few final words with Bond before succumbing to her injuries. In the aftermath, Mallory assumes the role of the new M. Eve reveals her surname, Moneypenny, and transitions from field agent to secretary. Bond 7 stands ready for his next assignment. The supporting cast adds strength throughout. Helen McCrory appears as Claire Dower MP, Nicholas Woodesson as Dr. Hall, Hugh Edwards as a BBC News anchor, and producer Michael G. Wilson makes a cameo appearance. Daniel Craig once again proves himself an ideal modern Bond, cool, composed, and relentless. Javier Bardem delivers a flamboyant yet menacing villain. His disfigured features the result of a failed cyanide suicide attempt, creating an unsettling presence. Judi Dench gives him emotional depth rarely seen in the franchise, while Ben Whisshaw's youthful Q provides refreshing wit and nostalgic charm. Naomi Harris and Ralph Fiennes round out a strong ensemble. After the somewhat underwhelming Quantum of Solace, this installment restores the series to peak form. The characters feel layered, the narrative is tightly structured, and the action sequences are both thrilling and polished, bolstered by impressive effects and practical stunts. Adele's Academy Award and Golden Globe-winning theme song adds grandeur, even if the noticeable product placement, such as Bond opting for Heineken over his traditional vodka martini, shaken, not stirred, feels slightly jarring. Classic elements return, including the Aston Martin DB5, Q, and Moneypenny, evoking nostalgia for earlier adventures. It stands as one of the franchise's finest entries and ranks among the highest-grossing Bond films alongside Goldfinger. The film earned the Academy Award for Best Sound Editing, shared with Zero Dark 30, and received nominations for Best Cinematography, Best Original Score, Thomas Newman, and Best Sound Mixing. It also secured BAFTAs for Best Original Music and Outstanding British Film, along with multiple additional nominations. James Bond himself has long ranked among cinema's most celebrated characters, placing high on lists of iconic heroes, sex symbols, and pop culture figures. After being disappointed by Casino Royale and skipping Quantum of Solace due to mixed reactions, I approached this film cautiously. However, the overwhelmingly positive buzz compelled me to see it firsthand, and I'm pleased to say it lives up to the acclaim. Rather than simply benefiting from lowered expectations, it confidently reestablishes the series as a top-tier spy thriller. Outstanding. Just as I expected, all those declarations calling this the ultimate Bond adventure feel a bit overstated. The movie opens with a thrilling pursuit that surges with energy and instantly grabs attention. It's slick, intense, and beautifully staged. Unfortunately, that electric beginning only makes the slower, uneven sections that follow stand out even more. With extended stretches of dialogue and a runtime that stretches well beyond 2 hours, the pacing noticeably sags in places. When Javier Bardem steps in as the villain Silva, the momentum improves. His character blends unsettling charm with psychological menace, evoking echoes of classic cinematic antagonists while still feeling distinct. His presence sharpens the narrative focus and injects tension where it's needed most. Still, despite a memorable underground train sequence and a few striking action beats, the film leans more toward introspection than spectacle. The script occasionally tangles itself in unnecessary complexity, and a handful of plot gaps are hard to ignore. The climax unfolds at Bond's ancestral home in the Scottish Highlands. a stark, windswept setting far removed from the glossy glamour typically associated with the franchise. The mood is somber, the visuals subdued, and even the weaponry feels intentionally old-fashioned. It's a bold stylistic choice, but one that may divide fans expecting something grander and more flamboyant. While the finale aims for emotional weight, it doesn't quite deliver the triumphant punch one might hope for. Daniel Craig remains a compelling 7. His portrayal emphasizes weariness and vulnerability, presenting a more battle-scarred version of Bond than we've seen before. Judi Dench adds welcome depth to M, portraying a leader forced to make morally complicated decisions. Bardem Silva avoids the standard world domination cliches, opting instead for a deeply personal vendetta that feels chilling in its own way. The supporting cast also leaves a strong impression, hinting at future developments within the series. The extended pre-title sequence sets the stakes high. Bond races across Istanbul's rooftops and atop a speeding train, trying to recover a stolen hard drive containing sensitive intelligence. When fellow Agent Eve takes a risky shot, Bond is struck and presumed dead, a shocking twist that sets the tone. Back in London, M6 faces internal betrayal and a devastating attack that forces the agency underground. Bond's path to uncovering the mastermind leads him from Shanghai's neon skyline to the floating casinos of Macau, culminating in a confrontation with Silva, a former operative bent on revenge. In many ways, this entry attempts to redefine modern Bond, focusing more on character depth than gadgetry, more on emotional stakes than explosive spectacle. For longtime fans accustomed to suave charm and high-tech wizardry, this grittier direction may feel unfamiliar. Yet others may appreciate the grounded tone and character-driven storytelling. As for the title, Skyfall isn't a metaphor about the heavens collapsing. It refers to Bond's childhood estate in Scotland, the symbolic heart of the story and the setting for its final confrontation. Craig may not embody the polished elegance of earlier Bonds, appearing more like a hardened fighter than a tuxedoed spy, but that physicality aligns with the film's tougher approach. Whether this stands among the very best in the franchise depends on what you want from a Bond film. It dares to take risks, prioritizes drama over dazzle, and offers a more human version of the iconic agent. For some, that makes it a standout chapter. For others, it may feel like a missed opportunity. For me, and for my wife as well, the film never fully clicked. It's not that it's poorly made, far from it. But for a James Bond adventure, it feels surprisingly restrained. The central conflict revolves around a stolen drive containing the identities of undercover operatives, encrypted but vulnerable, and a former agent bent on revenge who threatens to expose them. It's a high-stakes premise, yet somehow the tension doesn't always translate into edge-of-your-seat excitement. At the emotional core is Bond's loyalty to M, whose past decisions resurface with dangerous consequences. As M6 finds itself under siege, 7 must confront a threat that is as personal as it is global. Judi Dench returns as M with commanding presence, sharp, authoritative, and layered with quiet regret. She brings gravitas to every scene, and her performance anchors the narrative. Still, the standout performance unquestionably belongs to Javier Bardem as Silva. Bardem has built a reputation for magnetic villainy, but here he elevates the material. His Silva is unnerving without trying too hard, calm, theatrical, wounded, and menacing all at once. He doesn't just play the antagonist, he inhabits him. In several scenes, his presence is so commanding that the rest of the cast fades into the background. It's a chilling, memorable turn. The film includes the expected chases and combat sequences, along with a handful of gadgets, yet it avoids the excessive spectacle that defined earlier entries. The opening pursuit, complete with Bond battling atop a speeding train and a chaotic fight involving heavy machinery, delivers classic thrills. A misjudged order from M leads to Bond being shot and presumed dead, setting up a temporary disappearance that allows the film to question both the relevance of M6 and Bond himself in a modern, tech-driven world. Are there still shadows for spies to hide in, or has espionage become a digital battlefield? Daniel Craig, after a brief adjustment period, settles comfortably into the role. He may not exude the effortless suaveness of Sean Connery or the cool intensity of Timothy Dalton, but he brings a rugged realism and quiet resolve that suits this darker tone. His Bond feels worn down human, yet stubbornly resilient. Visually, the film is striking. Roger Deakins' cinematography turns nearly every frame into something worth lingering on. The Shanghai skyscraper sequence, in particular, is mesmerizing, bathed in neon reflections and silhouettes that transform a fight scene into a kind of modern art installation. Paired with Thomas Newman's atmospheric score, these moments linger long after the credits roll. Supporting performances add texture. Ben Whishaw introduces a younger, tech-savvy Q who challenges Bond's old-school methods, while Naomi Harris brings strength and composure to her field agent role, proving she can match Bond's stride for stride. The movie positions itself as both a tribute to the Bond legacy and a reflection on what makes the franchise endure. It takes itself seriously, but not so seriously that it loses its sense of cinematic flair. There are quips after tragedy, glasses of scotch poured at just the right moment, and a sense that Bond remains Bond no matter the era. Even so, the series may be due for fresh creative energy, new perspectives behind the camera, and perhaps a reinvention of tone. This entry delivers strong performances and gorgeous visuals, but it stops just short of being electrifying. If anyone seems slightly sidelined this time around, it's surprisingly Ralph Fiennes. That's not necessarily a flaw. Skyfall feels like it's carefully positioning certain players before fully unleashing them in future installments. Bond, once again, rises from the ashes, doing what he does best, delivering pulse-pounding action wrapped in familiar mythos. If you're already a fan, it's another stylish treat. If you're new, it works as a polished entry point into a legacy that isn't fresh but far from exhausted. And if you're among those who claim indifference to Seven, at least watch the opening sequence and every single scene with Javier Bardem. Seriously, it's worth it. The film checks many of the classic Bond boxes, though in some ways it doesn't quite recover from the mixed reception of Quantum of Solace. The pre-title action scene is energetic and entertaining, even if the decision to send the new Moneypenny into the field feels a bit forced. Adele's theme song carries the right dramatic weight, though the visual credits themselves lack flair. The middle stretch slows things down with recovery sequences, evaluations, and reintroductions, necessary perhaps, but not always gripping. Bérénice Marlohe's Bond girl is striking but underused. Bond himself seems emotionally detached from her fate, using the tragedy more as tactical leverage than anything personal. Javier Bardem, on the other hand, elevates the entire film. His villain, Silva, is driven by vengeance against M, and his motivation feels disturbingly justified. That dynamic, however, shifts significant focus onto Judi Dench's M, who occupies more screen time than some might prefer. With M, Q, and Moneypenny all heavily involved, the traditional Bond formula bends toward an ensemble feel. At times, you have to push through the slower or heavier segments to reach the payoff, and while it drifts from what some purists expect, it remains a solid entry overall. After 50 years of cinematic highs and lows, audiences have weathered countless storms with Agent 7. This 23rd installment, and Daniel Craig's third outing as Bond, carries a noticeably different tone. Some viewers may struggle with that shift, but it's intentional. Bond is bruised yet resilient, more human, yet still the dependable operative we expect. MI6 itself faces collapse, and Maya's leadership is questioned as her past resurfaces. Forced to relocate the agency, she places her faith once again in Seven. With the assistance of Field Agent Eve, Bond must navigate political tensions involving a new intelligence chairman and track down a calculating adversary bent on revenge. Explosions and spectacle are present, as always, but the emotional core rests more heavily on legacy and accountability than pure action. There's a sense that every event ties back to a larger reckoning, that nothing unfolds without reason. The soundtrack deserves praise. Adele's haunting theme stands among the franchise's most memorable, and the strategic use of classic rock elements adds texture to the atmosphere. The supporting cast, including Rory Kinnear, Ben Whishaw, and others, rounds out a film that feels both reflective and forward-looking. Criticism of this third Craig-era entry often feels exaggerated. Debating the best Bond film is a pastime without resolution. The franchise operates on a recognizable structure because iconic heroes thrive on consistency. Whether it's Bond, Batman, or any enduring fictional figure, straying too far from the established identity risks losing what makes the character resonate. Here, Bond returns to familiar territory, classic supporting roles reappear, traditional elements resurface, and the narrative centers on old versus new, tradition versus modernization. That tension gives the film its identity and sets the stage for a refreshed direction moving forward. Rather than reinventing the wheel, Skyfall reaffirms the formula while allowing Bond to evolve within it, firmly rooted in tradition, yet stepping confidently into the 21st century. Some villains feel as inseparable from James Bond as the Aston Martin itself, and this film delivers one of those unforgettable adversaries. There's so much here for longtime devotees and first-time viewers alike. Whether you've followed Seven since Dr. No, 1962, or you're stepping into the franchise for the very first time, this movie stands tall as a definitive Bond experience. The usual criticisms and nitpicks simply don't withstand close examination. Every fan has their preferred Bond era. Debates over the finest actor or the best installment are practically tradition. Across decades, the series has swung between brilliance and excess. Yet Skyfall feels like the rare moment when everything aligns, bringing the character closer to cinematic greatness than ever before. Let's be honest, Bond films often stumble over their own trademarks: outlandish action, gimmicky gadgets, exaggerated flirtations, and an overindulgence in style. Even strong entries have been weighed down by these familiar tropes. What makes Skyfall remarkable is its conscious decision to pare back the excess. The playful absurdity is largely set aside. When Q, portrayed with understated intelligence and youthful confidence by Ben Whishaw, dryly notes that his department no longer specializes in exploding pens, it feels like the franchise itself acknowledging a shift in direction. Bond's relationships in this film also feel more grounded. While romance and allure remain present, they emerge naturally rather than as obligatory checklist items. The tone is mature, restrained, and refreshingly sincere. That doesn't mean the film lacks spectacle. Far from it. The action is gripping and deliberate, free from the wink-and-nod campiness that once defined the series. Without the layer of kitsch, the tension hits harder. The opening sequence alone ranks among the finest in Bond history, meticulously staged, suspenseful, and escalating to a breathtaking crescendo before the title sequence even begins. From there, the film takes an intriguing approach. The first half leans more into investigation and character development than non-stop explosions. Smaller, intimate confrontations replace overblown chaos, but as the narrative advances, momentum builds toward an extended pursuit that launches a riveting third act. The climax, in particular, stands as one of the most emotionally charged and thrilling finales the franchise has ever delivered. A major reason for this impact lies in how Bond himself is written. Over the course of the story, layers are peeled back. The suave facade gives way to something more vulnerable and human. By the time the final confrontation arrives, Bond has confronted mortality, reevaluated his loyalty to M6, and returned to the long-abandoned home of his childhood. The emotional undercurrent never tips into melodrama, but for perhaps the first time in the series, we glimpse genuine fragility beneath the armor. Bond feels fully realized, complex, conflicted, and profoundly human. Daniel Craig proves to be the ideal actor for this interpretation. His portrayal carries a roughness and emotional weight that the story demands. That's not to diminish the work of those who came before. Timothy Dalton remains a personal favorite, but Craig's raw intensity perfectly suits this chapter. His Bond is less polished, more battle-worn, and the film benefits enormously from that edge. Equally vital is Judi Dench as M. Having first assumed the role during the Pierce Brosnan era, Dench brings gravitas and depth that anchor the story. For once, M is more than a distant authority figure assigning missions. She is central to the narrative, and Dench rises magnificently to the occasion. Naomi Harris breathes new life into Moneypenny, transforming what was once a lightly sketched role into a capable and self-assured presence. Ralph Fiennes delivers quiet authority as Mallory, while Albert Finney lends warmth and resilience as Kincaid, the loyal caretaker of Bond's ancestral home. In the end, Skyfall feels less like just another entry in a long-running franchise and more like a thoughtful recalibration of the myth itself. It respects tradition while refining it. It honors the legacy without being confined by it. For veterans and newcomers alike, this is James Bond at his most focused, most introspective, and perhaps his most complete. A James Bond adventure simply wouldn't feel complete without a magnetic villain, and Javier Bardem steps into that space with undeniable presence. As Raul Silva, he exudes a charisma that is equal parts charming and chilling. From his deliberately paced introduction opposite Seven to the simmering volatility he reveals as the story escalates, Bardem commands the screen with remarkable precision. His performance carries the same meticulous intensity he once delivered in No Country for Old Men, and watching him here is equally captivating. No discussion of Skyfall would be complete without mentioning Adele's haunting title track. The Bond franchise has produced a number of iconic theme songs over the decades, yet Skyfall stands tall among them. Though I may personally favor another, this particular song resonates with thunderous power. Adele's commanding vocals blend seamlessly with sweeping orchestration, heightening the dark elegance of the opening credit sequence that follows the film's shocking prologue. It's difficult to imagine a Bond theme more deserving of its Academy Award recognition. The musical score deserves equal praise. While the series has enjoyed many memorable composers, some soundtracks linger longer in the mind than others. Thomas Newman's work here is nothing short of exceptional. His compositions echo the dramatic weight of Adele's song and reinforce the film's somber, reflective tone. This was a story that demanded emotional depth as much as explosive action, and Newman rose to the occasion beautifully. There is so much more that could be explored about what makes Skyfall stand out. Bond's physical and emotional struggle to return to duty after the opening mission adds a layer of vulnerability rarely seen in the character. The visually striking sequences set in Shanghai and Macau are both thrilling and atmospheric, blending sharp dialogue with gripping action. M's tense hearings, alongside Mallory and members of parliament, add political gravity to the narrative. And the finale, both explosive and deeply personal, brings the story to an emotional close that lingers long after the credits roll. From beginning to end, this may well be one of the most carefully crafted entries in the Bond franchise. It feels deliberate, polished, and ambitious. When it first premiered, I remember thinking it seemed like an attempt to create the finest Bond film possible, while simultaneously stripping away many of the series' most familiar trademarks. By stepping back from some of the traditional Bond formula, the filmmakers managed to produce something bold and refreshingly mature. The result may be the closest the character has ever come to cinematic perfection. I happened to miss a few minutes at the start, but I walked in during an intense pursuit involving motorcycles and a speeding train. Bond is chasing a man who has stolen a crucial hard drive containing the identities of undercover agents. In the chaos of the struggle, another operative, acting on Moya's orders, fires at the suspect despite not having a clear shot. The bullet strikes Bond instead, sending him plunging into the water below. As the haunting theme song begins, the story transitions into its striking title sequence. Back in London, M faces mounting criticism and pressure to step down following the disastrous mission. The stolen data contains the names of British agents currently embedded in dangerous operations, and as those identities are leaked, lives begin to be lost. Watching these events unfold, I couldn't help but question certain decisions. Given Bond's importance, it seems surprising that no recovery effort is shown after he falls. Additionally, once the agents' identities were exposed, it raises the question of why they weren't immediately withdrawn from their assignments to ensure their safety. Despite these lingering questions, Skyfall remains a powerful, emotionally layered addition to the Bond legacy, balancing spectacle, character depth, and artistic ambition in a way few entries have managed before. I suppose by that point it was already too late. None of the agents really stood a chance of walking away from their assignments anyway. Spoiler warning, when we first catch up with Bond, he's wasting away at a quiet beach resort somewhere unknown, doing little more than drinking, flirting, and licking his wounds. Physically, he's healing, but it's clear his ego took the harder hit. After seeing a news report about yet another bombing attack in the UK that leaves several civilians dead, he makes the decision to return, unofficially at first. His reappearance is at Ma's private residence, not the office. She's more surprised that he suddenly shows up than she is curious about how he survived being shot and falling what looked like miles into a river. The dramatic way he steps out of the shadows strongly reminded me of the moody, theatrical entrances seen in Christopher Nolan's Batman films: dark lighting, quiet tension, and that sudden reveal. M agrees to reinstate him, but only if he passes a physical and psychological evaluation. During one of these tests, conducted in what looks like a sterile interrogation room, an analyst asks him to say the first word that comes to mind. He hesitates on Skyfall, a word that hadn't yet been explained to the audience. Later, we learn Skyfall is the name of Bond's childhood home in Scotland, where he grew up and where the story will eventually circle back. Unsurprisingly, he fails most of the assessments. Still, M sends him back into the field anyway. Next, we meet the new Q, young, bespectacled, and very different from the gadget-heavy Q of earlier films. Viewers might expect an arsenal of high-tech toys, but Bond receives only a personalized handgun and a small radio tracker. That's it. No invisible cars, no exploding pens, just the basics. It's a noticeably stripped-down approach. His first lead takes him to Shanghai. He enters a sleek casino wearing an earpiece, which made me wonder how that would realistically go unnoticed. A fight breaks out, and he ends up tumbling into a pit filled with deadly Komodo dragons. One of the henchmen tries to fire Bond's gun at him, only to realize it won't work for anyone else. Moments later, the unfortunate attacker becomes lizard food. Oddly enough, the local thugs seem less aware of these creatures than Bond does. From there, the movie largely becomes a series of physical confrontations. Aside from the opening sequence, much of the action centers on fistfights, brief shootouts, and a tense moment involving an elevator shaft. It's more grounded, but perhaps less spectacular than what some might expect from a Bond film. We're then introduced to Silva, played by Javier Bardem, a former MI6 agent with a grudge against M. His elaborate schemes include orchestrated bombings, carefully designed traps, disguises, and even a staged subway crash. The destruction of Bond's ancestral home during the climax especially felt reminiscent of the layered, psychological villainy scene in Nolan's Batman trilogy. The main difference. This time it's Bond caught in that darker, more personal narrative style. Before seeing the movie, someone told me the opening felt like classic Bond, but the rest didn't. I can understand that perspective. The film takes creative liberties with the character and leans into a more brooding tone. Interestingly, that same person preferred Casino Royale over this one, even though they don't typically watch many action films. Personally, I slightly favor this film, even though I rated both the same. There's more action overall here, though I wouldn't say it's executed as impressively as in some other modern action movies. In the end, it's a Bond film that experiments with mood and character depth, sometimes at the expense of traditional flair, but it remains an engaging watch nonetheless. It's remarkable what happens when genuine artists are allowed to leave their fingerprints on a blockbuster. On paper, this is the same familiar formula we've seen time and again, shepherded by the same long-standing producing powers. As is tradition, the production reportedly faced turbulence, with major creative shifts occurring even after cameras were rolling. And for the first time in the series, the product placement feels overt enough to momentarily pull you out of the experience. Yet despite all of that, this installment works for me, and the reason is simple. The creative center of gravity has moved. Not every scene bears the touch of the cinematographer. The large-scale exterior action sequences are bound by genre expectations and logistical rigidity. There's only so much artistry you can inject into explosions and chases. But in the quieter, story-driven moments, the presence of a master behind the lens transforms everything. Two sequences stand out as exceptional marriages of production design and camera language. The first unfolds in a gleaming glass tower in Shanghai. Even the establishing shots carry a hypnotic elegance. The play of reflections and silhouettes recalls classic mirrored imagery from cinema history, yet the execution feels sharper, more kinetic, more assured. It's a near-wordless passage that tells its story through framing, contrast, and motion. The second occurs on Silva's island, where Bond, restrained and vulnerable, confronts his adversary inside a stark, almost eerily sparse computer chamber. In contrast to Shanghai's visual silence, this scene brims with dialogue. What fascinates me most is how the set is defined by absence rather than clutter. The supposed supercomputer infrastructure that underpins the villain's reach is barely there, visually speaking. Negative space becomes the design's central feature, especially after we've seen that much of the island's exterior shell has been compromised. There's been considerable discussion about the director's debt to Christopher Nolan. The tonal gravity and architectural minimalism in these sequences make that influence unmistakable. But influence alone isn't the story here. In a genre addicted to gadgets and exposition, there's a boldness in withholding. Unlike filmmakers who quote cinematic history without elevating it, these moments expand the visual language of the franchise. What emerges is a vocabulary built on calibrated hesitation and strategic omission. Dialogue lands slightly off rhythm. Spaces feel intentionally underdefined. Shades of gray dominate the frame, enhanced not just by lighting, but by digital grading that refines mood rather than spectacle. The surface effect is subtle complexity. Scenes feel less straightforward than we're accustomed to, but the impact runs deeper. Mainstream action cinema usually relies on a dependable rhythm to deliver information, visual cues, spatial orientation, rapid edits. When that rhythm is disrupted, even slightly, viewers grow alert. We begin to fear we've missed something, and when certain details are deliberately withheld, even minor ones, it heightens engagement. The audience leans forward. Anxiety becomes a narrative tool. In that sense, the film feels part of a broader shift in contemporary filmmaking. Just as Hitchcock's grammar once permeated mid-century cinema, Nolan's structural sensibility now echoes through modern blockbusters. I can't discuss this entry without addressing its treatment of technology. We're given the familiar archetype, a mastermind who appears to have anticipated every contingency years in advance, orchestrating elaborate schemes with uncanny precision. It's a trope that borders on myth. I've always thought of it as a kind of inverted noir, not doomed fate closing in on helpless characters, but an unseen architect manipulating coincidence for dramatic effect. In classic noir, the universe feels controlled from above, cruelly arranging events for the suffering of its inhabitants. Modern blockbusters often internalize that power within a character, typically a villain wielding technological omnipotence, only for the hero to ultimately disrupt that control. Normally, cinematic portrayals of hacking drive me to distraction. When films attempt realism, they distort it to satisfy visual storytelling, and the inaccuracy's great. When they lean fully into fantasy, I find myself convinced I could script something more convincing. Here, however, we're operating in a different register. The reality on display is neither strictly authentic nor fully cartoonish. It's stylized, abstracted in a way that feels intentional rather than careless. The balance between real-world reference and genre convention is deliberately blurred. The villain's digital omniscience exists in a cinematic reality shaped by mood and structure rather than technical accuracy. And strangely enough, within that heightened world, it works. The lead actor is exceptional at anchoring the delicate balance the film tries to maintain. Once the noir-style complications enter the picture, however, the rules shift. We're no longer dealing with computer magic in the traditional hacker sense, but rather in the cinematic, CGI-driven sense. That's the key detail. The antagonist is never shown actually operating a computer. This matters because he feels partially fused with us, the audience. His manipulation of events resembles the art of filmmaking itself. Q, by contrast, is surrounded by every cliché associated with a modern tech specialist. He may be brilliant, but his expertise is confined strictly to machinery within the movie's internal logic. His greatest contribution amounts to scattering digital breadcrumbs that lead to Skyfall Lodge. He's portrayed as a straightforward stereotype, unlike Silva, who resists easy categorization. It's strange how credibility seems to shift depending on whose world we occupy. As someone familiar with computers, I find Silva believable in principle, even while he stands in an absurdly stylized cyber lair. And this despite his background as a former field agent, not exactly a profession renowned for tech genius. With Q, however, we witness the supposed hacking wizardry firsthand, including work attributed to Silva, and it rings hollow, almost as fanciful as something out of Tron. It feels like Mendes deliberately leaned into that stylization, rather than opting for the grounded technological realism Ridley Scott employed in his more recent Alien installment. In this 23rd Bond outing, Seven quite literally rises from the dead after a stolen hard drive puts him, Dench, under political fire, just as a ghost from her past resurfaces with vengeance in mind. One undeniable truth about cinema remains: no James Bond film will ever satisfy every Bond enthusiast. From every corner come complaints: too gritty, not playful enough, insufficient romance, lacking action, short on spectacle. And that's fair, we all have our preferences when it comes to Seven. But the world has evolved, and so has Bond. You may not receive the definitive version of the character you imagined, but this is unmistakably a 21st century Bond. A new era is firmly in place. That's what makes Skyfall such a bold entry, celebrating the franchise's 50th anniversary by weaving nostalgia together with reinvention, and largely succeeding in the process. The film invites us to indulge in memory, while also questioning where our iconic secret agent fits in a rapidly changing world. One of the most compelling aspects of this chapter is its persistent meditation on time. Is Bond, and by extension M and M6, outdated, or does the modern world still require operatives like him? Mendes and his collaborators resist easy answers. Instead, they center the film on Bond and M as characters, honoring long-standing traditions while delivering emotional blows that land squarely in both mind and heart. Narratively, the plot is straightforward, almost textbook Hollywood in its structure. But layered onto that simplicity is a cascade of quintessential Bond pleasures: breathtaking action, dramatic confrontations, and deaths that carry emotional weight. The electrifying pre-credits sequence sends Bond racing across Istanbul's rooftops on a motorcycle before battling atop a speeding train, only to be deemed expendable moments later. That shocking turn flows seamlessly into Daniel Kleinman's title sequence, steeped in ominous imagery of blood and mortality, underscored by Adele's hauntingly classic Bond anthem. From the outset, the film signals its intention: respect tradition while promising emotional consequence. When Bond reemerges, he's a shadow of his former self, unkempt, physically diminished, and emotionally bruised. Yet Daniel Craig sells the transformation convincingly. This is a battered agent who can still outdrink most men and lock eyes with a scorpion without blinking. We know he will recover. That resurgence is inevitable. His loyalty to M, part maternal bond, part professional duty, remains unwavering. Then enters the adversary who truly challenges this iteration of Bond. Javier Bardem's Silva is mesmerizing, a cyber-terrorist with bleached hair, a chilling grin, and an unsettling sensuality. During the interrogation scene, his flirtatious menace crackles with tension, and Bond's sly response only heightens the electricity. It's a confrontation that signals we are watching not just a battle of skill, but of identities, old world versus new, flesh versus code, loyalty versus betrayal. There's more simmering chemistry in this film than just one famously steamy shower moment. The sharp, playful exchanges between Bond and Eve, Naomi Harris, in terrific form, crackle with sly humor and suggestive wit. Yet beneath the flirtation, this story ultimately centers on a far deeper bond, the devotion between Bond and M. This isn't the typical romance that has often anchored previous entries in the franchise. Here, loyalty runs deeper. Bond would sacrifice everything for M, and it's a pleasure to see Judi Dench given material worthy of her talent. Daniel Craig meets that intensity head-on, delivering a final act that stands among the strongest climaxes in the series' long history. This time, the battleground feels personal. As fragments of Bond's past begin to surface, he is forced to confront buried memories while still doing what he does best, taking down anyone who stands in his way. Longtime fans should prepare themselves. The emotional impact here recalls the finest moments of classic Bond. All the traditional ingredients remain firmly in place. Breathtaking international settings, stunning women, high-speed chases, brutal hand-to-hand combat, daring stunts, eccentric villain hideouts, and unapologetic bravado. And importantly, it remembers to be entertaining. While Quantum of Solace functioned effectively as a straight action thriller, many felt it strayed too far from the spirit of Bond. However serious the tone becomes, this character thrives on a touch of mischief. Thankfully, this installment restores that balance. Craig blends his hardened, brooding presence with a razor-dry sense of humor and a relaxed confidence that proves beyond doubt he owns the role. Behind the camera, the craftsmanship is equally impressive. Cinematographer Roger Deakins paints every frame with elegance, whether capturing glowing urban skylines or sweeping natural landscapes. His use of color and light is extraordinary. Few working today handle warm, golden tones with such finesse. Is it flawless? Not quite. The plot remains relatively straightforward. The new Q leans a bit too heavily into tech geek territory, and the final confrontation could have been more substantial. Even so, the film feels like a celebratory milestone done right. It honors the franchise's legacy while confidently stepping into a new chapter. It respects where Bond has been and suggests where he's heading, and through it all, one thing remains unmistakable. We still know the name. Audiences typically expect a Bond adventure to deliver glamour, gadgets, thrills, and pure escapist fun, enjoyable excess, in the best possible way. That formula shifted with Casino Royale, which introduced a more emotionally layered and character-driven interpretation under Craig. Quantum of Solace wavered slightly, but with Academy Award-winning director Sam Mendes taking the helm here, expectations were understandably divided. Having seen it, I fall firmly in the camp that embraces it. The producers deserve credit for taking a risk. On the surface, the film checks all the familiar boxes, yet underneath it redefines the character in bold ways. Bond is no longer invincible. He doubts, he falters, he feels the weight of his past. The supporting characters feel grounded in reality as well. Gareth Mallory carries a credible military background, and Q is reimagined not as a miracle worker of fantastical inventions, but as a sharp young specialist dealing in plausible technology. Much of the emotional weight rests on M, making this perhaps the most grounded entry in the series. What truly elevates the film, however, are its technical achievements. Deakins' long-overdue recognition as one of cinema's finest cinematographers feels undeniable here. Visually, this may be the most striking Bond film ever made, a blend of scale, atmosphere, and artistry that sets it apart from the rest of the franchise. In short, this is a bold evolution of Bond. It may not satisfy every expectation of a masterpiece, but it confidently reinvents a legend while honoring everything that made him iconic in the first place. One of the film's most breathtaking moments unfolds in Shanghai, where Bond silently trails a hired killer through a towering glass building lit by glowing digital billboards. The confrontation that follows, played out against shifting neon silhouettes, feels almost dreamlike, more like modern art than a traditional action sequence. It's a kind of visual poetry rarely associated with the franchise. Much of that atmosphere comes courtesy of cinematographer Roger Deakins, whose work here elevates the material tremendously. The editing by Stuart Baird is equally sharp and controlled, avoiding the frantic cutting style that plagued Quantum of Solace. Where that film felt chaotic, this one breathes. From a purely technical perspective, this may be the most polished Bond installment to date, and it wouldn't be surprising to see awards attention follow. That said, not everything lands perfectly. Some viewers have taken issue with the narrative structure. Certain threads introduced early on seem to fade away without much resolution. Bond's sudden vanishing act after the opening mission, for instance, feels glossed over. A handful of plot conveniences and loose ends don't go unnoticed either. When multiple screenwriters are involved, that lack of cohesion can sometimes show. The decision to set much of the story in grounded, everyday locations like London and the Scottish Highlands also marks a tonal shift. Instead of globetrotting escapism, we get something more rooted and restrained. It raises an interesting question. Does this more British-centric atmosphere resonate differently with international audiences? The antagonist, Silva, played by Javier Bardem, is a divisive presence. On one hand, Bardem brings intensity and unpredictability to the role, a former MI6 operative betrayed and left to suffer horrific torture. His physical deterioration, including the gruesome cyanide incident that permanently disfigured him, reinforces the depth of his grudge. His vendetta isn't about world domination, it's deeply personal. There are moments when the performance teeters toward theatrical excess, but that flamboyance arguably suits the character. Some subtle hints about Silva's psychology and ambiguous undertones are introduced but never fully explored, leaving room for interpretation. Meanwhile, Daniel Craig delivers a more vulnerable Bond than usual, physically worn, emotionally bruised, and questioning his place in a changing world. His dynamic with M, portrayed once again by Judi Dench, becomes the emotional backbone of the film. Unlike previous entries, M is central to the drama, even facing public scrutiny and institutional doubt. Their relationship gives the story unexpected weight. A standout supporting turn also comes from Ralph Fiennes, whose character steps into the chaos at a crucial moment, adding gravitas and presence. Final thoughts: despite minor narrative missteps, Skyfall remains one of the most engaging Bond films in years. It trades excess spectacle for atmosphere and character, grounding the franchise in something more reflective and emotionally resonant. Some longtime fans may prefer the more extravagant adventures of the past, but this installment dares to slow down and look inward. Ultimately, it's a Bond film defined less by gadgets and globe-spanning villainy, and more by mood, performance, and craftsmanship. Its hypnotic visuals and thoughtful tone make it a standout chapter, one that feels both classic and refreshingly modern at the same time. Silva seems to have cyber skills and advantages that even trick MI6's Q, Ben Whishaw, and cause plenty of headaches for the agency. When Seven is taken to an island with a city abandoned by hysterical citizens who believed they would perish, Silva has a building plentiful with computer technology that has raised such havoc around the world. Such power at his fingertips, how Bardem describes this, and a bit of homoerotic groping on Seven, while Bond is bound in a chair, are examples of the showy theatrics for which Silva embellishes his villainy, provided much opportunity for him to smack around the morale of a highly renowned British intelligence agency. This film sheds light on a new threat that cannot be so easily exposed and recognized when M addresses her Judiciary Committee and their questions on her agency's mistakes.